mid-page, and we're looking here at Numbers chapter 14, verse 24, regarding Caleb in particular. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. And so we are looking at Caleb. We are looking at the attitude, the mindset as it relates to being better people and being convicted and humble in our fixation on God and on his word. And if someone would like to read for me here, these next two paragraphs, it starts with the moment we look at ourselves. And then if you could just read through that passage there of Matthew 7, 21 through 23. Yes, sir, brother. That's the morning class. Page 61. Yes, sir, brother. Page 61. Mid-page there on page 61, the moment we look at ourselves, and then all the way through the top of page 62 through Matthew 7, 21 through 23.
The moment we look at ourselves and become pleased as we compare ourselves with others, we let down our guard. We fail to try as hard as we should and strive to be pure and spotless before God. We fail to consider our own worthlessness. Isaiah 64, verse 6. But we are like an unclean thing, and all our righteousness are like filthy rags. Romans 3, 10 and 11. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks after God. All our righteousness is pointless, vain, if we do not wholly submit to God. According to 1 Corinthians 13, the ability to do miracles and speak prophecy in the first century, having ultimate faith, giving everything we own to help the poor, and even giving our own life. These things without love, an example, obedience, John 14, 15, Matthew 22, 36 through 40, with a sacrificial attitude and concern for others over self, profit me nothing. Verse 3, Matthew 7, 21 to 23. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness.
Thank you, brother, so much. So I think if you were to really pin down the word that Jeff is really focusing in on here with this verse, it's the word fully. It's the word fully regarding Caleb and what made him different, a different spirit in him, and has followed me fully. So it's not just in deed, and it's not just in outward appearance or image, but there is the holistic aspect of Caleb's faithfulness. He is wholly submitting himself, fully submitting himself to God. And I love this first line here of that which Tom just read. The moment we look at ourselves and become pleased as we compare ourselves with others. Caleb certainly could have done that. You look at the 10 spies that opposed him and Joshua. You look at the way in which he saw God's promises comparative to others. Obviously, Caleb, give me this mountain. He could have very easily said, you know what, compared to others, I'm doing pretty good. Compared to others, I'm doing pretty good. Who is it that we ought to, and we're commanded to, compare ourselves to? Who is it that we aspire to be like? Christ, that's right. 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 1, Paul says, imitate me even as I also imitate Christ. And so when that bar is fixated on and with discipline we pursue it, are we ever going to be proud of ourselves? No. And that's not to say we should live discouraged or depleted. Certainly we should take rest and solace in the fact that God has allowed us to be able to be approved. Study to show thyself approved unto God. 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15. I can know whether or not I'm approved in God's sight. But it's not because of me. It's because of him. It's because of the word that he's provided me. I'm studying his word. I'm a workman that needeth not to be ashamed. I'm looking at his law, his perfect law of liberty, James chapter 1, and by that standard, I'm then aspiring toward it. I'm pushing toward it. I'm constantly striving to be more like what he wants me to be. And so therefore, he is the one that is worthy of all the glory. He is the one worthy of all the praise. He is the one deserving of all of our, quote, pride, the proud feelings that we would have, all are to be channeled to him. And this is very, very hard for us to do. What is it that we like to do? We like to kind of look around and we like to say, you know what? I think I'm doing pretty good. I think I'm all right. And Caleb, again, certainly could have done that. He, comparative to his peers, did what he ought to have done, trusted in God, but he didn't just trust in God regarding his deeds and regarding the outward actions. He trusted in God with his heart fully. He had a different spirit, a different attitude, a different mindset, disposition within himself. Can someone read these next two paragraphs here? Obedience is necessary all the way through the very top of 63.
Are above, rather than things on the earth. Colossians 3:1-2. We desire to be first, rather than slave of all, not realizing that Christianity is about following Jesus, who did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Mark 10:44-45.
So this is again, I think, a very helpful discourse. And the thought process here regarding Caleb as provided by God in Numbers chapter 14:24 helps us reset the table in terms of our wholeness or fullness as examined by God. God sees everything. God sees everything. What does man see? Yeah, man sees self, but what does man see in us? In other words, what can man evaluate in our lives? The outward, the fruit, the outward appearance, right? And the limitations are also bound to actual exposure, right? I mean, man can really only see what man sees as exposed. So I may be doing things outwardly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that certain men see it. For example, if our family were to travel to Las Vegas, nothing wrong with going to Las Vegas. It's an interesting city, interesting architectural pieces there, an interesting just general dynamic. But if we were to then go in there and start gambling, if we were to then go in there and start going to adult clubs, go in there and start drinking and doing drugs, which, by the way, is legal in certain drug classes, y'all wouldn't see it, right? So you would not be exposed to that. So then there's the ability to then come back and then all of a sudden say, hey, well, in front of my brethren, I'm going to behave a certain way. Or put another way, hey, when I see my brethren, when we assemble together, I'm going to behave a certain way. But then I'm going to go home and I'm going to act in a completely different way. In the privacy of my home, there's pornography. Maybe I got some liquor in my cabinet. Maybe there's certain dynamics in the family that are not becoming of a Christian? Well, my brethren don't see that. Man is limited in what man can see. But what does God see? God sees everything. And that's both from a positive view. In other words, God sees our hearts and God sees our minds, even though man does not see it. And it's also from a negative view. In other words, we might be thinking that we're hiding ourselves, but God still sees it. So if I am faithfully pursuing God, but man thinks of me as little or diminished or not worthy of any form of attention, God still sees whether or not I am pursuing him with my all. Man may not necessarily look at that as, positive. Well, you know what? You don't seem to really know too much about this or about that. So, you're not somebody we really want to spend our time talking to. Well, God sees our intentions. God sees our hearts. God sees what we're after. Again, same thing flipped. Think about what God tells Samuel regarding, again, David, verse 7. God says this to Samuel, "For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart." God sees everything. Go to Hebrews chapter 4. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 13. "Neither is there any creature that is not manifest in his sight, but all things are naked and opened unto the eyes of him with whom we have to do." Who was it that knew whether or not Caleb was following God fully? God. God knew that. God knew that, and only God knew that. And so I think in the Lord's church, this is probably one of our biggest challenge areas. And here's why. We know what the Bible says regarding worship. We know that it pleases God to worship him with our hearts, making melody in our hearts. And we know that God has not commanded pianos, drums, band, etc. And just like Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 through 2, that's problematic. Nadab and Abihu died for approaching God in such a manner. So we know that. We know God commands worship on the first day of the week. Acts chapter 20 and verse 7. We know what God commands regarding the organization of the church. 1 Timothy chapter 3. We know who is to be glorified in all things regarding the way in which we designate or understand ourselves and identify ourselves. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 29 and verse 31. We give God all the glory. We know what God commands regarding salvation in terms of what is essential. Baptism, 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 21. We know what God expects regarding worship and the aspects and acts of worship. So we know these things. These are outward identifiers that we are able to point to and say, and certainly in terms of our abilities, how are we supposed to judge? Matthew chapter 7, by their fruits. So, that's how we have the ability to judge ourselves and to keep ourselves in check and accountable. Those are appropriate. But sometimes we think, well, I'm taking care of those things, and so therefore, I can kind of do what I want to do on the side. I can still have me. And that wasn't the case with Caleb. Caleb followed God fully. He had a different spirit in him. Can someone read these next three paragraphs for me on page 63?
Many in the denominational world believe that nothing is required of us in order to be saved. However, the Bible is replete with statements to the contrary, such as this one. The passage will be useful in discussion with denominational individuals, as well as discussion with non-Christians who need to understand the nature of true Christianity, and Christians who have failed to follow Christ to the level of commitment that we should.
And such a blessing, again, to hide this in our hearts. Because remember, the benefit is twofold. Thy word have I hidden in my heart that I might not sin against thee. And as Jeff points out, the denominational world, our friends, even liberalism within the church wants to say, well, none of that really matters. Wait a second. Numbers 14:24. Let me recalibrate here compared to all the other sources that are trying to influence me to think otherwise. And then also, from an evangelistic perspective, this is an opportunity. By the way, is it threatening to talk about Caleb? Think about that for a second. Hey, let's think about Caleb for a minute. Do you want to be like Caleb? I want to be like Caleb. Now, most people, if they have some Bible knowledge, they might not exactly remember who Caleb is, but they probably remember and associate positive things. They're probably going, yeah, I want Caleb. I'd like to be like him. Okay. Well, let's think about how Caleb was. Numbers 14:24. Followed God fully. Any comments or thoughts here before we move on to number 15? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. That's right. Absolutely. 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 And if you think about the way Jeff has cataloged and classified these verses, that's kind of the thought process there. Maybe in your engagement, as we come across a certain individual, maybe there's a certain bend that bend's probably the wrong term. Maybe there's a certain ideology that they represent. So liberalism or, again, Christians who are erring that we need to encourage, or, maybe they're atheist. So based upon that channel and that bend, there is a sequence or a connection, an association of verses that we can then kind of play off of. And maybe we start with one, but then it adds to another. And absolutely, in regards to the crowd, right? Who went against the crowd? Caleb. Caleb went against the crowd. He didn't follow a crowd. He didn't follow the other 10 spies. And by the way, what then did the rest of Israel do? Well, it wasn't just the spies. Look with me real quick. Let's go there. Let's go to Numbers. And notice here, starting in verse 6, Numbers 14, Joshua the son of Nun, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, rent their clothes. So not following a crowd, not going with a crowd. How's it start? They're going to go against the rest of the spies. They rend their clothes, and they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to search, it is an exceeding good land. If the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it us, a land which floweth with milk and honey. Only rebel not ye against the Lord. Neither fear ye the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Fear them not. But all the congregation, bade stone them with stones. The narrow way. The difficult way. Living a godly life is hard, but it can be done. Caleb did it. Can be done. Thank you for that comment. Any other thoughts here? All right, let's go on to verse 15. The 15th verse in our study. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 24. And again, from a classification perspective, how does he classify these? This is fundamentals for non-Christians, new Christians, and teens. It's refuting Protestant denominationalism and community churches, and it's also religious liberalism, both within the churches of Christ, or within the churches of Christ is his focus there. So again, liberalism within the church. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 24, and the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. So why has God given us his word? Why has God given us his commandments? By the way, let me ask you a question. Is this book, is this an easy read? No. Quantity, right? There's a lot. Complexity, there's a lot. Difficulty, it's there. Now, it is easy if we have the right heart and the right mindset. We can understand it. God's given it to us to understand. Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 4. He's not provided us something that's not capable of being comprehended. But does it take work? 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. It takes work to understand this. It takes work. But why has God done it? Has he done it to just, let me just show those people? Is that why God's done this? Has God given us all of this because he's just saying, well, you know what? Let's just see if you really care. Has God given us this because he's like, well, I want to send those people to hell, and you know what? If they don't want to read my word, then you know what? That's what they're deserving. Is this the mindset? Is this the reason? Has God just given us a bunch of just prescriptive requirements just to burden us?
It would be cruel of him to create us and not give us instruction.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Imagine thinking, here I am, what do I do? Look at it from that lens. We would be pleading and longing for, can I have some guidance? And if this landed in our lap, in isolation, in a vacuum, what would we do? We would, with gratitude, pour over it and recognizing, to Steve's point, the loving kindness of God to provide us such instructions. But this becomes a challenge when what? We want something else. We want our way. We want our interests. We want our way of doing things. Then we realize, wait a second, this is at odds with what I want. So therefore it becomes what? Hard.
I would reword what I just said. I wouldn't say it's cruel. I would say it's gracious that he's given.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we don't deserve
Yeah,
anything.
yeah,
But he's given.
sure. He has graciously provided us instructions. Titus chapter 2, we're going to look at that this morning, by the way, right? And if we had what we deserved, we wouldn't even be living. But when we realize that what we deserve is death, Romans 6, verse 23, then all of a sudden we say, wait a second, I get to have, as we're going to look at in Bros and Barbecue, the mind of God. Wow. Why does a mother say, don't touch the stovetop? I thought those are just prescriptive requirements and prohibitions. And that child wants to experiment. That child wants to see things. That child wants to figure out how life works. How dare you require that child to be as you say that child should be? That's what the world tells us, right? Too hard. God has given us his word for our good, for our benefit, for our help and support. Let's read here these first two paragraphs. I know they're long, and we'll pause and then we'll wrap up this verse. Just the first two.
Many non-Christians reject Christianity on the grounds that it is too discuss further with Proverbs 29:18, sin only gives passing pleasures. Hebrews 11:25, not long-lasting happiness. God, being the creator of the human mind, knows what will bring happiness. Though we might think that doing what we want will help us achieve happiness, there is a way that seems right to a man, Proverbs 14:12. The truth is that it will only bring us heartache in the long run. The child thinks that running in the street or touching a hot stove will bring him happiness. The child thinks that receiving anything and everything he wants would be good, and even believes that taking those things from others is appropriate. However, a loving parent teaches the child the truth and enforces rules, laws for the child's good, knowing that those rules will bring the child happiness in the long run at the expense of restricting the child's momentary pleasure. A parent's rules will keep us alive physically and spiritually. Similarly, God's laws are always for our good. We may not always immediately understand how, but in the same way that the rationale of a parent is oftentimes beyond that of a child, the mind of God is beyond that of man, Isaiah 55:9. Our permissive, tolerant, entertainment-crazed, immediate gratification-starved society frowns upon laws and restrictions, as would be expected, as was the case throughout Israelite history. Things going on in the surrounding society tend to creep into Christendom. The result in this case has been the denominational world as well as the liberal element in the Lord's church becoming anti-law. God's laws are evil in their sight, and anyone who advocates adherence to them is termed legalistic. This passage, as well as Deuteronomy 10:12-13, Psalm 19:7-8, and Proverbs 29:18, inform us that God's laws are for our good and should not be disregarded or esteemed unimportant. Obedience to God's laws is critical for those who wish to enter heaven, Matthew 7:21-23. And those who espouse anything different are teaching alien and hurting those who listen to them. In the same way that teaching children is to disregard their parents' rules is not doing them any favor.
Thank you, brother, very much. Can someone turn to 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 10-12 and read that for me? First Peter 3, 10-12.
For he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips they speak no guile. Let him eschew evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are open to the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against them that do evil.
Okay, so the standard is there. The place of blessing is there. The goodness is there. God says, if you want it, here's how it can be had. And that is for our good. That is to love life. That is to see good days. But man says, but that's not what I want, so it can't be right. No. It's universally absolute. Think of it this way. What does 2 + 2 equal? 4. Now, I can kick and scream. I can write 1,000,000 papers. I can go and get 1,000 degrees and travel the world and insist it does not. But does that change 2 + 2 equaling 4? No. The source of goodness, the source of happiness, the source of peace, the source of blessing does not move. It doesn't shift. It's static. And it comes from He who is absolute in power, in benevolence, in knowledge, which is Almighty God. God then says to man, here's access to my mind, His word. Within it, man can tap into those realities. But man thinks, well, wait a second, that's not what I want. I don't like that. Well, then you're choosing then to exclude yourself from the source of benevolence, from the source of blessing, from the source of peace. See, man likes to negotiate. Man likes to figure out, especially here in America, how to have it all. I want everything. But it doesn't work that way. It's binary. It's black and white. And that doesn't make God cruel. God has graciously granted us access to it. We're not deserving of it. And so this particular passage then wraps. It says this passage will be useful in helping non-Christians to see the importance and greatness of God's laws, as well as helping the denominational world and liberal element in the church to see that God's laws are perfect, converting the soul. Psalm 19 and verse 7. What a blessing it is to have this verse to hide in our heart. Thank you all very much for the class.